Hello, welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I'm your host. Alright, we're back from the holiday, and we're on the running stretch to Christmas and New Year's Eve. We have a lot to talk about, not a lot of news, but quite a few things to review. So let's start off with some news topics, the first and only one of which is that Wonder Woman 2 is going to apparently be in Ultra 4K HD and a bunch of other high-def formats on HBO Max, and it's being touted as the first movie on HBO Max to do that. Cool for those that have equipment that can handle that. Patty Jenkins has gone out to say that if you are watching it at home, try to watch it on the most crisp, largest, widest, screenest TV you have. And you know what? Kudos for that. I think that's how you should watch movies like that if you're watching it at home. But honestly, most people, including me, will probably just be watching on their phones or laptops. And that's fine too. So fingers crossed that at the very least it's going to be okay. And apparently the movie is 2 hours and 30 minutes. So it's going to be a long watch either way. Now let's move on to what I read this week. First off, we have Strange Adventures number 7, and we're halfway through this Max series, and I can resoundingly say that this series is finally getting some semblance of an actual plot. Not simply rehashing old beats and cliches, but with this pretentious and awkward filter of meta-commentary and realism, like it actually seems to have some sort of narrative and character purpose and engagement that it's going for. All that said, it's still one of the most limp and lackluster things I've ever read. It's a simple as hell plot, but with King relying heavily, and I mean heavily, on his artistic collaborators to give it any kind of weight or impact and trying to give it more flourish and substance than it actually has. I mean, why put care and effort into building a story of actual suspense, stakes, thrills, drama, and substance when you can just have Doc Shaner feel have an issue with some intense imagery? And that's not knocking on Doc Shaner, he does an amazing job, but the fact remains that he's basically doing all the heavy lifting here, providing enthralling visuals that are truly arresting to the senses, but with a thorough line that is weak at best, non-existent at worst. If it was earlier in the run, say maybe this was like the second or even first issue, it might have gone actually a long way to setting a mood of confusion, but also of mystery, putting you and the reader off kilter to the story ahead and how it might unfold and reveal more about itself. You know, something more tantalizing and exciting. As it stands, we're over halfway through, and the preceding 6 issues have been the life out of whatever interesting ideas or conceits or novelty this Max series ever even had. So, you know what? 2 thumbs down. And 1 thumb up for Doc Shaner, though. Let's move on ahead to Alien, the original screenplay, issues 1 through 5, because it just finished. And first things first, I've read a handful of these original screenplay adaptations that Dark Horse have been doing for some Fox movies, like the earlier one for Planet of the Apes. And they've been mostly decent to pretty bland. But this newest one, which just wrapped up this week, of course Alien, based on the original script by Dan O'Bannon and adapted by Cristiano Seixas and Guilherme Balabi, has to be one of the best so far. Now, a lot of contention has circled around production and writing an original Alien film, going as far as some heated debate over who actually deserves more of the story credit for it. Dan O'Bannon has always been adamant that he wrote most of it and that most of what he wrote made it onto screen, while Ridley Scott and the producers have noted many rewrites and changes of plot that make it more nebulous. Now, if we take this miniseries at face value, and that is an accurate representation of what Dan wrote, then we can definitively say that they're both kind of right. And what I mean by that is that it's a matter of tone. Dan's other most notable writing credit has to be Return of the Living Dead, a pitch-black horror comedy that goes for their gut in gags and in its unceasingly relentless tragedy and bleakness. And basically, that's what his script for Alien was originally all about too, capturing that same darkly cynical comedy of errors that was rampant throughout Return of the Living Dead, but in a sci-fi outer space setting. So while his script really did contain almost all the same plot beats and structure that made it into the final film, the tone is widely and distinctly different. Whereas something in the finished product was played for unrelenting suspense and chills, the exact same or analogous scene would be kind of ridiculously farcical in his script. So I can see why he'd be so staunch in his stance that he wrote the whole thing. But film is a collaborative process, and what ended up on screen and that we've already seen make it as divergent creatively as much as they are actually similar. That said, even though the actual film is one of my most favorite horror movies of all time, I would have loved to have seen the version of the film this comic is meant to represent. The tone, the humor, the cynical, unforgiving bite just spoke to me and made reading this a hilariously unnerving experience. Although I will say one thing, I was surprised by the ending. Of all the things I've heard about the original ideas for the film, I would have been so certain that one of these was Dan O'Bannon's and that the comic was building up to it. Except it doesn't, and that was a bit surprising. Maybe a little less exciting a finish as the rest of the issues, but overall, it ended up being a pretty good read. So, one thumb up, one thumb middle, and I definitely recommend this, especially if you're a fan of the franchise. It has a lot to offer. Moving ahead, let's go on to Hellions number 7. Alright, we're back to the post-X of Swords status quo with this new issue of Hellions, and you know what? It's about as good as I remember Hellions being. Well, that's not true. I was rather bored by the original Hellions issues. It was stagnant, uninteresting, and bland. X of Swords really showed a way for the series to actually find its own tone and identity. If the comic back to its own agenda, it's really taking advantage of that boost, carrying forward a lot of the same manic and madcap energy that its tie-ins reveled in. It stands to see whether or not this new arc is actually going to make any use of that tone, but it's still appreciated, and it's just good to see how the series is now running with some of the ideas it had left over from the event. And, that it's taking advantage of its new reputation. I think a lot of people who got onto Hellions because of the event really loved the sassy and just snarky way about itself, and this is really digging itself more deeper into that. So, you know what? It gives it more time and more meat to chew over. Overall, 2 thumbs middle. And lastly, we have X Factor number 5, and this was okay. The best part of the first arc was everything concerning Mojo World. It fit the really easygoing and candy-coated aesthetic of this run like a glove. Everything else is just so formless and really hard to get a grip on. It's easy to digest, airy entertainment, and that's all, which is fine. I just don't really care about the characters or whatever dynamics or arcs they're going through. Dealing with Rockslide is a good anchor though, and I'll read on to see what happens with that. But overall, I'm just very uninterested in all of it. 2 thumbs middle. Anyway, let's move on to what I watched this week, and that would be Fargo Season 4, which finally ended, and it gets time for me to give my thoughts on it. It's a really good season of Fargo. While the start of the season does give it this great foundation and a good sense of itself, at the end of the day, it doesn't really wrap up its own narrative as much as it just uses its ending to push forth things we've seen in previous seasons, which is a shame because it could have been a really great standalone story. But as it stands, it's just there to bridge together some disparate ideas and plots and ongoing threads throughout the series. And makes it a little bit weaker. I mean, it's great as that. It does a really good job at that. And it really does give the series a lot more richness in some aspects than it previously had. But I would have enjoyed and I would much preferred an ending and an end stretch that I guess spoke to more about itself. It speaks more to Fargo as a whole than it does as its own thread, as its own plot thread. And I guess you have to take it or leave it. This is definitely far from the worst or most disappointing season of the series. And as a Fargo fan, I did get a lot out of it. I did get a lot of humor out of it. And I just got a lot more interest out of it. Just seeing how they played with those cliches and seeing where they left off. And I think they really did leave off on a very somber, thematically resonant note for the original series. It felt, especially in the last couple of episodes, a lot like On the Road to Armageddon, like The Hunger Dogs, and like even Gods Must Die. And I just really appreciated that. So overall, I really enjoyed this season. If you're a Fargo fan, I would definitely recommend it. If you're a fan of the Fargo series or movie, I would definitely recommend it. It is a bit too wafty at times, and it could have used a really strong grounding force that it just never really gains. Overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. And an overall season score of 7.5 out of 10. Anyway, that's it for this week. I just want to say thank you everyone out there who's still listening and who has continued listening. It means so much to me, and I'm just so humbled for that. And I'm just really grateful for it too. And I just want to say thank you so much to the cover artist for our show at DOTEMCE. Please shoot them out. They really deserve it. And just give them all the following and all the love that you can. And I just want to announce that I am still going to do a best of 2020 awards thing like I did last year. We had Wonder Woman coming out on Christmas Day, so I'm going to have to make sure to start it way later than I was originally going to accommodate for that, so people have enough time to see that and can make informed choices on the Google Docs. Last year we had a great turnout for that, and I'm hoping for a similar turnout, so be on the lookout for that, and I can't wait to get that rolling. Anyway, have a great weekend, and see you again next time.